grow closer to each other in your relationships, whether that's today or one day, because you might be saying, well, I'm not in a relationship right now. This is still a great series for you to be a part of. So, ladies, I need your help to start, all right? So, ladies, can you just make some noise one more time? Like, okay. Guys, I'm going to get to you here in a moment, all right? But ladies, how many, if you think about when you were a little girl, you thought about like the perfect wedding, or maybe the perfect wedding dress, or maybe you would meet the perfect guy, or you would live in the perfect house with the perfect kids, and you had names for all of them. If that sounds anything like what you dreamed about as a little girl, would you just raise your hand right now? Okay, raise your hand. Lots of hands. All right. Now, guys, I imagine as a teenager you fantasized about something slightly differently. Just throwing that out there. Maybe, guys, you were dreaming about like getting married and having sex twice a day. If that's closer to probably what your dream was like, just raise your hand, all right? A little honesty in church. Okay, yeah, okay. How many of you today are still dreaming? Yeah, okay. How many know sometimes our idea of what marriage is going to be like and look like is not always the reality of what it is. And so many marriages today just aren't working. In fact, we know that depending on the different studies you look at, about 50% of marriages don't end up making it. They end up winding up in divorce. And if you thought about that for a moment, that you knew that something as important as marriage, there's a 50% chance you weren't going to make it, wouldn't you do everything you could to be able to make sure that you went the distance, to be able to protect it and prepare for it? Like, if I said if you got into a car and there's a 50% chance that you could get in a wreck and die, like you'd be throwing on a helmet, installing a roll bar, and like you were, beefing up, taking driving classes so you can get, around all these crazy drivers in Arizona. Like, you're going to do everything you can to prepare for that. Or maybe something a little bit sillier, but like if you knew that there was a chance, 50% chance, that a wild javelina would attack you on the way to get to the mailbox, but you needed to really get that mail. There's something very important there. You wouldn't just like kind of go out there and say, well, I hope I don't get attacked by this wild javelina. Like you'd probably take that helmet that you had for your car situation, you put that bad boy on, maybe you grab a weapon. I don't know, I'm not advocating it. Maybe you take out a shotgun or something, like a baseball bat. You find something to do battle with, because you're not going to just go out there and leave it to chance. Unfortunately, though, when it comes to marriage, I think a lot of people go in blindly and they leave it to chance and just hope that it will work out. And what ends up happening is they find themselves struggling. And I believe that the reason that so many marriages are struggling is this, because we don't want to just diagnose the symptoms of a struggling marriage. We want to really get to the root. And the root, I believe, is that people are not spiritually prepared to live a marriage that honors God, to live in a marriage that honors God. And so isn't God-honoring, great, fulfilling marriage possible? That's the question today. I would say 100%, absolutely, emphatically, yes, it is. Yes, it is. But it's not going to happen if we just keep going and doing what everybody else is doing. We need to find a better way. And so over the next several weeks, we're going to be talking about some different things. Today, we're going to talk about really the priority of marriage, and who's number one is the title of today's message. We're going to talk about in a couple weeks when we jump back into the series about pursuing your partner. I just want to tell you there's going to be some great stories that I'm going to share about sappy things that I did, and there might even be some pictures and some like show and tell of some of the things that I did in the past that Carol's held on to, all right? So you want to be there for that. And then we're going to talk about partnership and how we actually have roles in submission and honoring one another. I know spooky, scary words that we don't use today in culture, but I believe that God has a plan for marriage. And then we'll end by talking about purity. And if you're here and you say, well, I've already missed the boat on that, and maybe you're beating yourself up, I just want to encourage you that purity isn't just something that you do, but it's a mindset that you can have. And you can start today living a life that God desires in your relationships. Amen? Amen. So today, though, I told you we're going to talk about priority. And if you've ever met that person, maybe you've met the one. Like any Disney fans out there? Any Disney fans? All right. How many have Disney Plus here? Like I was against it, but my kids and my wife, they just wore me down until finally I had to give in for Disney Plus. But if you know, in like a lot of the, especially the older Disney movies, there's a princess or a prince, and they're looking for the one. And you know, it's that one person that makes you feel a certain way, like a radio or a song comes on the radio, and you're listening, and all of a sudden your heart beats a little bit faster as you begin to think about them, and maybe even a tear begins to goosebumps, and like something magical. This person, they can do no wrong. They're so wonderful, and you think they are the one for me. They're the one. But can I encourage you today to just change it a little bit? Instead of saying, I've found the one, say, I've found the two. Instead of saying, I've found the one, say, I've found the two. And this is what Craig Groeschel says, and I love this. God is your one, and your spouse is your two. God is your one, and your spouse is your two. The Bible says, in fact, Jesus says in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's a question that's asked him, what's the greatest commandment? And he says to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And he said the second is like it. They're connected, but there's an order to it. And he says to love your neighbor as yourself. And it's this idea of God always has to be first, preeminent, in that number one seat. Only God deserves to be in that place. And then others, and in this case, in the marital sense, your spouse. Now, if you're not married here today, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm not trying to embarrass you. Just go ahead and raise your hand. Just keep them up for a moment. Scan the room. Just look around. I'm just trying to help you out a little bit here. If your eyes lock and magic happens, just go with it. Let it take you where you may. You can start a singles community group, singles that like to mingle. Okay, anyway, put your hands down. But if you're hoping to marry today, there's a promise, a vow that you can make, and it's this: I will seek the one while preparing for my two. I will seek the one while preparing for my two. There's an old story anecdote that's told about a party girl, and she didn't have her life together and just kind of made some poor choices along the way and was continuing that lifestyle and continuing to make those bad decisions. And one day she meets this guy, and one time, and has this conversation with him, and she goes and sees her mom, and she's like, Mom, I found the one. I found the one, and he's so amazing, and you're going to love him too, because like he goes to church, and he loves God, and he's got a great job, and he's just got it together, and he's fantastic. And the mom, like, kindly, gently just kind of leans toward her daughter and says, do you think you're really the type of girl that a guy like that would really want? And I know that's a harsh way to say it, but I would say it maybe this way, the way that Andy Stanley says it. Become the person you are looking for is looking for. Become the person you are looking for is looking for. See, it's more about being the person than finding the person. Whenever your pursuit is to find the person, you're always going to struggle. But when you just trust God to be the person that He wants you to be, then you will find who He wants you to be with. God is preparing you for someone so that you can serve with Him. But God always has to be our one. If you're married, you have a slightly different vow that you're going to take. And I want every married person to listen to this today. Our vow is this: I promise God will be my first priority, and my spouse will be my second. I promise God will be my first priority, and my spouse will be my second. If you go ahead and turn to Genesis chapter 2, we're going to look in verse 24. It's the very first book of the Bible. It's just the second chapter, so that larger number there, that's the chapter, and the smaller numbers of the verse. If you don't have a Bible, by the way, we have some for you out at the Welcome Center. I've seen people been taking those the last several weeks. That's awesome. And we just say this: read it, do what it says, and watch it change your life. But in Genesis chapter 2, just to kind of back up and give you a little of the story heading into this verse, God creates Adam. He creates the first man out of the dust of the earth. And then the Bible says that he saw that it was not good that he was alone, and so he created a helpmate. And so he puts Adam to sleep, and he takes out his rib, and he forms out of that rib woman. And her name is Eve. And so they're really the first couple, the first marriage that we see within the Bible. And this is what it says in verse 24. And it's really our theme verse throughout this entire series. That is why a man leaves his father and his mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. That word leaves comes from the root word azab. Everyone say azab. Say it one more time, azab. Like you're angry almost, like azab, And it means this: to loosen or to relinquish. So growing up, your primary relationship here on earth is going to be your parents or whoever are raising you. That's your primary. But eventually, when you meet someone and you get married, that begins to shift. And you move away from that parental type of relationship and you move towards focusing on now your husband or your wife, that person that you are going to be with. And you say, God is your one, and my spouse is my two. There's a loosening, a relinquishing, a transition, if you will, there. But here's what I really want us to focus on today. When you put your spouse as number one, then some bad things can begin to happen because you're asking them to do something that is not humanly possible. When you put your spouse first, you will first idolize them, and then you will demonize them. It goes like this. You're dating. It's going great. Ladies, and he's so laid back. He's just so easygoing, so wonderful. Go with the flow. You get married. That dude's a lazy bum. Why didn't he get off the couch? He's always playing video games. Why are you always in front of the TV? Can't you do anything? Then maybe guys, you think, oh, she's so driven. She's just goal-oriented, detailed. She just takes charge. She's organized, everything that I'm not. And you get married, and you're like, she's driving me crazy. She's nitpicking everything I do. She's constantly nagging me. She's so controlling. Because why? Because you idolized them, and you made them something that they weren't. And when they couldn't live up to that impossible standard, you have to demonize them. That's the process here. The problem is that you're asking your spouse to meet a need that they are not designed to meet because you're putting them in a seat that God is only supposed to occupy. In fact, when you start with the wrong person in the number one seat, here's what will happen. Eventually, you'll say they're not cutting it, so I gotta rip them out of that number one seat, and I gotta put something else there. And often in the marriage relationship, what ends up going there is your kids. All right? And think about how unfair that is that your kids are your number one. I hear people say that, and it scares me a little bit because your kids, if all the pressure is on them to make you happy, to make you fulfilled, they can't do it either. That's an enormous pressure to put on a child. And what ends up happening is you pour all your time and energy into your kids. One of the spouses usually ends up getting jealous, and they pour themselves into something else. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's another relationship. Something happens, and you put your marriage on the back shelf. Whenever God moves out of his rightful number one position, your marriage and your family will never be all that God intended it to be because you're not making God the priority of your life. If I can just be honest and transparent with you for a few minutes here, one of the hardest seasons of our marriage is when I was throwing myself headlong into ministry, into the church. I was completely oblivious. I know it's hard to imagine that a guy's completely oblivious, but completely oblivious to Carol's needs. And church, though I would have never said it out loud, church was clearly evidenced by my actions. It was number one. In my mind, working long hours, jumping to everybody's needs, making sure that I was always there, staying late. That's what a good pastor did. In fact, it got to the point where Carol had our third child, Judah, and he was born on a Thursday. And she came home on a Saturday, I believe. And on Sunday, I left her, our 4-year-old son, Luke, our 3-year-old, just turned 3-year-old son, Josiah, and a newborn all by themselves because I had to go to church. Because, the church couldn't function without me. I was so important. And I know that's a horrible, horrible thing. And I just left her there, and she actually came to church, and I was like, oh, she's just so great. And it was really just because she couldn't handle 2 little kids and a newborn. She was completely overwhelmed. She felt isolated, and she felt alone. It's why we had to keep having kids, so I could just get one of them right. It's one of them. But if I can go a little bit further, Carol was spending so much time with the kids because I wasn't spending enough time with them as a family that I felt neglected and I began to grow jealous. And what I want you to see is that sometimes it's not the bad things that divide you in your marriage. Sometimes it's the good things, the blessings from God that are not prioritized that can mess things up and create a tension within your relationship. And we must fight to keep God as our one and place our spouse as our two. See, through all of this, Carol, she was jealous. She was jealous of my time that I was always giving to other people but not giving to her. And I want you to understand this. She had a legitimate jealousy. I know we think jealousy is always bad. Do you know God is a jealous God? You know why God is a jealous God? Because he's supposed to be number one, and when we take him out of that number one position and we put something else there, someone else there, he becomes jealous. Because God is perfect and God is holy. And he needs to be number one here, not just for his sake, but listen, for our sakes. We will not be fulfilled. We will not be healthy when we take God out of the preeminent position in our life. And so she had a legitimate jealousy. Now, what you do with that jealousy is very, very important. We don't want to go into a place of sin. We don't want to move out of a place that we should be in. But listen, if you're in a relationship and your spouse is spending more time and is more focused and prioritizing your children more than he is you can have a legitimate jealousy. Did you know that your friends, you can have a legitimate jealousy over your spouse's friends? If you're always hanging out with your boys or you're always hanging out with the girls, like, you need to make sure you're taking care of your marital relationship first. I know people who are jealous of this. They're like, he holds that more than he holds me now. Like, for real. There's legitimate jealousy. And we need to be careful to be aware and not be like I was, completely oblivious to what was happening right in my own house. The things that destroy marriages aren't often the bad things. They are often good things that just aren't prioritized correctly. So one big thought today, it's this: protect the priorities. Would you say that with me? Protect the priorities. Say it one more time. Protect the priorities. That's what we're going to do as a church and as individuals. We're going to get real practical here. We're going to put God first and then our spouse. Listen, if you're struggling today, I bet you can trace it back to the fact that God is not number one, and probably if you're struggling in your relationship, your spouse is not number two. My kids, they know who is first in our house. Like, I like to kiss my wife, and I do it often in front of my children, and they're like, oh, that's so disgusting, and they cringe, and it's gross, and I don't want to do that. And I'm like, listen, guys, if we didn't do this, you wouldn't be here, all right? And just saying, like, just throwing that out there, right? All right? You know. We finally figured it out. But seriously, like, we go out on date nights or we go out in the day, and they're like, we want to go out. How come you don't take us out? And it's like, because we like each other. Like I don't just like kids. I like your mom. Like, okay, that's how all this is working. Okay, so we go out there and we don't apologize. We want them to know we love each other. When we sit down at the dinner table, we do highlights and lowlights, and often our highlight is that we got to spend time with each other. What are we telling our kids? We're telling them that we love each other, and this is what a healthy marriage looks like. We don't nail it all the time. We mess up plenty of times. We argue, we fight. We have our issues, absolutely. But we try to model best we can what a healthy relationship is. So I've let you into my business for a moment. Can I get into your business for a second here? All right. Can I just say this? Do not be child-centered in your relationship. I know some people are like, well, that's, no. Do not be child-centered. I didn't say not be about them, not centered in your relationship. Children are important. They're a blessing from God, but they're not as important as your marriage. They're not. I make no apologies for this. Sometimes people try, like, do you love me? Yeah, I love her more. I do. Absolutely. I love God most. I love her second. That's how it is. You get this in order. If you want to love your kids, then prioritize and invest in your marriage and show them what it looks like and what God intended it to be. You've probably seen it before. Somebody who prioritizes their kids, they're number one. They're sitting in the preeminent seat. The parents are running around at every beck and whim, doing everything they want to do. They're going from this thing to the next, and they're wearing themselves out. And 25 years later, they're sitting across the room from each other. They're looking at each other and say, who are you even? Like, I don't even remember how we fell in love. What happened? You lost intimacy because your whole life revolved around your children. Listen, your children are an assignment. They are wonderful. You get them for 18 to 20 years. If they're a millennial, maybe 30. I'm just kidding. All right. Just kidding, millennials out there. Just playing. I love you. All right. It's too good of a joke to pass up. I'm sorry. But eventually, it's good to push them out and let them learn and grow as their own person. But marriage is till death do us part. It's not until we need, not until we're not happy anymore. It's not until you're not meeting my needs anymore. It's not until something better comes along. It's not until there's a better model that you can trade in for. And listen, if there's, a marital affair sometimes or abusive situations, I'm not really speaking to that. I'm talking about just in the regular context of life and marriage. It's till death do us part. This is why we have to put our spouse before our kids. It's not that we don't feed our kids. It's not that we don't make sure that they take a bath, because God knows they wouldn't if we didn't make them. It's not that we don't clothe them, because boys would probably be running around naked today, all right? We do all those things. We take care of their needs, but we put our spouse before them. If you want your children to succeed in marriage, model it, model it, model it. Right now, we're going to take just a minute, because I thought in this message, it's great, you can maybe hear some of my thoughts, but it's really good to hear from the other side. And so Carol answered a few questions this week, and I want you to watch this video. It's just about 3 minutes, and learn and hear really her heart and some of the wisdom that she shares.
When I'm cultivating my own personal relationship with Jesus, when I'm spending time with Him, when I'm secure and confident in His love for me and who He's made me to be, I really focus on myself less. And that frees me up to be able to ask, right, how can I serve Him today? How can I make His day easier? What can I do to show Him that He's special and that He's loved? And it just makes me more able to love Him the way He should be loved. I spend time each day reading the Bible, praying, seeking God, asking Him to help me. I need a lot of help. I'm not naturally an unselfish person, so I ask Him to help me to think of others, to be more patient and more kind and more understanding and more helpful in serving Ray and my kids and the people around me. Well, we've always been really good about going to church together, to serving a church community and being involved there together. And one thing we're trying to come back to this year is praying together daily. I'm just taking a few minutes to thank God for each other and pray a blessing over each other before we start our day. And then we also host a community group in our home, and we love to do that, to have a time to gather with people from church, other followers of Jesus, to talk about life and what's going on, and really encourage each other that way. Well, this one can be a little bit harder for me. We have 5 kids, and they're all still pretty young, so they take a lot of time and attention and energy, and as a mom, I want to give that to them and pour out into them, of course, but we always try to make each other a priority in our home. Ray and I were on the same team, and try to remember that when we're dealing with our kids. If they come to mom and ask for something and I say no, then they're going to go to dad, or vice versa. But we always support each other's decisions when it comes to parenting and discipline and all of that kind of stuff. And then maybe later we have to have a discussion, and Ray might come to me and say, do you think you overreacted a little bit? And we have that discussion and maybe change a punishment even. But in front of the kids, we're always a united front. And we're also very affectionate in front of our kids. We hug and kiss and sit next to each other at the dinner table and when we're hanging out watching movies and that kind of stuff. But we really want to set that example for our kids, that we like each other, we like being together, we love each other, so that they see that and they know what a healthy marriage should look like.
Come on now, that's some good wisdom right there. Thank you, babe. Can I just thank you so much for all you do. You are truly amazing. Like, I don't deserve you, but God's been really good to me. And so grateful for you and all you do for our family. You sacrifice and give, and you lead the way, and you are an example and always challenge me to make me a better man. So thank you. I love her to death. Love her to death. The reason that Carol and I were doing this series, in part, is because our hearts really do break. They break for those who aren't experiencing the fullness of what marriage could be. Because what we're talking about today is really, really simple, but if we're being honest, it is not always easy. It's simple in that we put God first. But we have to not just say it, we have to do it. We have to do it. We have to be people who will pray together. We listen to what the Bible says and genuinely seek God for help to live it out. We let the Holy Spirit lead us and guide us and help us along the way. We work to protect the priority of marriage. And men, if I can just speak to you for a moment, because I think women often shoulder the load in a lot of marriages, especially on the spiritual side of things. Men, I believe probably most of you have a desire to protect. How many, if somebody broke into your house, all right, and they were threatening you or your wife or your kids, like you would rise up to defend your family? Come on now. Like, it doesn't matter, you're in your tighty-whities. You're getting up, all right? You're grabbing the nearest weapon, a lamp, like next to you on your nightstand, and you're going to battle. And if they're going to get to your family, they're going to have to go through you because you're going to be willing to die for them. How many are willing to die for your families? Can I just encourage you for a moment? If you're willing to die for them, would you be willing to live for them? Would you just be willing to live for them? Your role is to protect the priorities, man. To do everything within your power. God calls us to lay down our lives for two things. To lay down our life for Jesus and to lay down our life for our spouse. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. What does this mean? Gentlemen, it means that we keep God first priority. We are people of the church, people who are in the church. We bring our families to church. We serve in the church. We are people of the Word. We are daily reading our Bibles. We are modeling this for our kids. Community is a part of who we are. We are in a community group doing life together. And you say, well, I don't need it. Well, what kind of example are you setting to your spouse when they feel all alone and they don't have anyone to go to because you feel like you can do it all by yourself? What kind of an example are we to our kids when we say, you know what? You're fine. I made it by myself. Figure it out. When life gets crazy, we guard our time and we take time to talk. We stop the busyness of work and life because our wives, they matter. When life is going nuts and you don't know how to communicate, you work at it so that you can cultivate intimacy. We have date nights. We go on day dates. We get away when we can. And some of you are going to say, well, we can't afford it, Ray. And you'll make an excuse. But you know what I found is love doesn't make excuses. Love makes a way. Love makes a way. Listen, you're broke? Put on some Netflix, give the kids some Benadryl, and lock the bedroom door. Come on, somebody. You know what I'm talking about. Borrow a tent. Get a candle, throw it up in the backyard. You don't got a backyard, put it up in your living room and let the Spirit lead you where you may go, okay? If things get a little bit crazy, just have some water in there so you can put the candle out. I'm just saying, all right? You can do almost anything. Not anything, but almost anything. Like one time we were on our 10-year anniversary trip. We went to Big Bear in California, and it was great. And we were just out shopping, and we met this couple. And they were fully clothed, okay, at the time, but they felt this urge to tell us that they were nudists. I don't know if that was an invitation, but it was a hard pass from Carol and I, all right? You can do almost anything, maybe lead the nudist colonies out though, okay? But we must, church, protect the priorities. Men, we must protect our wives. We can never be fulfilled though until we meet the one, until we have a relationship with Jesus. God is our one, and our spouse is our two. When it goes in that order, we can build a foundation, and our marriage can stand on it. And so today, this is what we end with. I promise that God will be my first priority, and my spouse will be my second. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes here?